This happened to me about 6 years ago, back when I was still in my getting my steps in era. You know, that phase where you convince yourself that walking everywhere will magically counteract all of the junk food you're definitely not giving up. My routine was simple: start from my house, wander aimlessly for a few hours, and then turn back. Think of it as a low-budget version of Frodo's journey, minus the ring or any companions. I usually started my walks between 11 a.m. and 2 p.m., prime daylight hours when the scariest thing that you might encounter is an overly friendly dog. But on this particular day, life had other plans. A mountain of chores delayed my walk, and by the time I was free, it was 3 p.m. Now, I debated skipping the walk entirely, but in a classic case of this is probably a bad idea, I said, screw it, what's the worst that could happen? Well, spoiler alert, a lot. I headed out, telling myself that I'd keep it short because, walking in the cold after dark is basically torture. Fast forward 3 hours, and I was about 6 miles away from home, realizing that I'd timed this walk about as well as a clown showing up at a funeral. The sun had set, and the air was turning icy, and I was 2 miles from home. So far, so chilly, but manageable. Or so I thought. As I had passed a convenience store, I noticed a man sitting against the building, smoking a cigarette. He looked like he'd been cast as random shady guy number 3 in a low-budget thriller. Black hoodie, black pants, black shoes. Basically, the human equivalent of an ominous soundtrack. He stared at me blankly, and I did the universal, I'm not making eye contact with this potential weirdo move, and I kept walking. A few steps later, I glanced back. Guess who decided to join my parade? That's right, Black Hoodie Guy was now following me. I tried to convince myself that it was a coincidence. He's probably just going the same way, I thought. Then he started yelling, "Hey," which, let's be honest, is never a comforting thing to hear from a stranger after dark. I ignored him because, let's face it, there's no scenario where turning around to chit-chat would end with me or him winning the Nobel Peace Prize. That's when he upped the ante and yelled, "What the f***?" in an angry tone, like I just cut him off in traffic or something. At this point, I texted my dad, because when you're being followed by a potential villain, you call in the reinforcements. My dad told me just to keep walking, and he said that he'd meet me soon. I was less than a mile from home when I noticed something. The guy wasn't giving up. He kept following me, and I knew that turning onto my street was not an option. I certainly didn't want to gift wrap my home address for this lunatic. So I passed my street and I texted my dad to pick me up somewhere else. That's when things went from creepy to oh hell no. I heard frantic footsteps behind me. Finally, turning around, I saw him sprinting toward me with his hood up, looking like he'd just been possessed by the spirit of Usain Bolt himself. So I did what any sane person would do. I ran like I was auditioning to replace the Flash. The cool one, not the problematic one. I crossed the street, heart pounding, wondering how my life had turned into a horror movie cliche. Finally, headlights appeared in the distance. It was my dad's car. I waved my arms like I was trying to signal a UFO, and thankfully, he saw me. I jumped in the car, adrenaline pumping, and explained everything. My dad, being the classic dad, decided to play hero and drive around looking for the guy. But, just like every good horror villain, the stalker had vanished into thin air. Poof. Gone. No sign of him anywhere. From that day forward, I made 2 life changes. 1, I stopped walking after 2 p.m., and 2, I started carrying a pocket knife on my walks, because as much as I love getting my 10,000 steps in, I'm not about to star in a true crime documentary. And you know what? Honestly, I'm okay never knowing what would have happened if he would have caught me. The joys of teenage exploration, where common sense gets tossed out of the window and replaced with a flashlight and blind optimism. Last night, my friends, 2 15-year-old males and 1 14-year-old male, and I found what every group of teenage boys dreams of: a mysterious tunnel in the side of a hill. It had a grate on it, but part of it was broken, practically inviting us in. It's like the universe said, "Hey, want to make some poor decisions today?" Of course, we didn't dive in right away. That level of reckless genius requires some planning. So, the next day, armed with powerful flashlights and the unwavering confidence of youth, we decided to explore it. Now, let me clarify. This wasn't some basic stormwater or sewage tunnel. This thing was a 5 by 5 foot square, which is basically the architectural equivalent of "I dare you to see how far you can go before you regret everything." We dropped down into the tunnel, and the first stretch, about 100 feet in, was standard urban adventure territory. Graffiti on the walls, a faint sense of regret bubbling up, and lots of, "Dude, this is so cool." But then, the graffiti disappeared. It just stopped. In hindsight, that should have been our first red flag. Graffiti is like the universal sign of humanity. If it's not there, then you've ventured into nope territory. We started hearing these faint, metallic clangs. At the time, we brushed it off as a car running over a manhole cover, because, clearly, when you're deep in an unlit tunnel, the best explanation for creepy noises is traffic. Genius logic, I know. The first stretch was about 200 to 300 feet of cement tunnel, which eventually made a right turn. Here's where things got weird, though. The ceiling changed from cement to sheet metal, complete with screws poking out of it. Because, nothing says welcome like screws dangling just above your head. We kept going, another 150 to 200 feet, and then turned left. After another 100 or so feet, the tunnel opened up into a room, and let me tell you, this wasn't just any room. No, this was a smorgasbord of unsettling. Here's the inventory. A manhole cover on the ceiling. Classic horror movie feature. Stairs going up. Always a bad sign. An oval opening leading to a leafy area, because who doesn't love a side of nature with their nightmares? A perfectly clean square tunnel continuing ahead, and I mean suspiciously clean. And finally, the piece de resistance, a dead raccoon. Now, this wasn't your standard roadkill raccoon. This guy was scalped. I mean, he had no more fur on top of his head, with his skull exposed and zero blood anywhere, which was weird, and not even a hint of decomposition. It was disturbingly pristine, like it had been freshly murdered by someone who was both precise and very, very weird. But, in true teenage fashion, we said, weird, and just kept going. Because why not double down on bad decisions, right? We headed down the square tunnel towards a faint patch of light that was about 400 to 500 feet away. But here's the catch. The tunnel started shrinking. It was like the walls were closing in on our sanity, and by the time we hit the last stretch, it was about 4 feet high. Picture 3 teenagers crouch waddling through a narrowing tunnel like we were the stars of Cirque du Soleil Sewer Edition. Oh, and guess what we found about 50 feet from the end? Another dead raccoon. I mean, one wasn't creepy enough. And this one, too, was in perfect condition. No rot, no blood, just chilling there, like it was waiting for us to start asking existential questions about life or death. When we finally emerged, we popped out next to a gas station. We gave each other high fives, took a minute to rest our aching backs, and then went inside to grab some well-earned snacks. Because nothing pairs with dead raccoons like Cool Ranch Doritos and a shared 2-liter of Mountain Dew. On the walk back to my house, the adrenaline did finally wear off, and we started putting the pieces together. The lack of graffiti, the unnatural cleanliness, the clanging noises, and the scalped raccoons. It was all just wrong. Like horror movie wrong. The fact that the tunnel never seemed to pass under a road only added to the mystery. We still don't know what that tunnel was for, or who or what might have killed those raccoons. All I know is that next time, I'm gonna stick to video games for my adventures. This happened to me when I was 12 years old. Back then, life was all about awkward bus rides, questionable decisions, and if you were me, accidentally starring in your own episode of Croatia's creepiest encounters. Allow me to set the scene. I went to a private school in Zagreb, which meant my daily commute home was a public transport odyssey. Bus to tram to walking. It was a real planes, trains, and automobiles, minus the planes and John Candy. The routine was solid, except for this one time when it went from mundane to full-on nightmare fuel. It was an afternoon week, meaning classes started later in the day and ended around the time when every creepy dude seemed to crawl out of their hiding spots. A few classmates and I hopped on the bus to head toward the main street. It was your standard ride. Empty seats, scattered passengers, and an air of, please, no weirdness today. But of course, fate had other plans. I made the mistake of sitting in front of him. A balding, middle-aged, slightly dirty-clothed dude, the human equivalent of a malfunctioning smoke detector. Just unsettling. But you tell yourself it's probably fine. That illusion shattered when he started to stare at me. Not just glancing, not even lingering, but full-on, I know what you had for breakfast kind of staring. Feeling my skin crawl, I grabbed a book from my bag and pretended to read. And by pretended, I mean I stared at the same paragraph for 10 minutes while praying that this guy would develop a sudden fascination with the floor instead. My phone was dead, because why charge it when you can live dangerously? So I had no way to text anyone. Classic rookie mistake. When we finally reached the main street, my classmates and I got off the bus, and the guy followed. At this point, I was mentally running through every bad decision that I had made that day, sitting in front of him, not charging my phone, and thinking that this would be just another normal commute. I told one of my friends about him, but whispered like I was in a spy movie. What was my logic, you ask? Well, if he didn't see fear, maybe he'd lose interest. But here's your spoiler alert. He didn't. We got to the tram station, and the guy hung around at a distance. When my tram arrived, I thought, this is it. I'm free. My friend and I boarded the tram, only to watch in pure horror as the guy followed us on. At this point, my inner monologue was screaming, seriously? Do I have a sign on my back that reads, "Follow me for a free psychological horror experience"? When we approached my stop, my friend and I tried to plan our escape. But then, the guy pulled a move straight out of the creepy stalker playbook. He got off the tram first and walked toward the park, the opposite direction of where I needed to go. Relieved, I figured he was finally done. Oh, sweet, naive, past version of me. As soon as I got off the tram and started walking home, I felt it. The unmistakable sensation of being followed. Turning slightly, I caught a glimpse of him. My relief vanished faster than my phone's battery that morning. I picked up the pace, hoping to outwalk him, but this man was determined. By the time I turned into the alley that led to my apartment, he was dangerously close, When I reached my building, I hit the intercom button like I was trying to unlock a secret level in a video game. "Mom, please buzz me in now." She must have sensed the urgency because the door unlocked quickly. But just as I stepped in, the guy caught up. Here's where it got super strange. He started talking in this overly familiar tone. "Hey, how you been, buddy? I saw your dad yesterday. He told me all about your new school." Now, I may be 12, sir, but I'm not gullible. Plus, my dad had been out of town for months at this point. I knew he was lying, and my brain was now screaming, "Danger, danger." But my body, it was frozen solid. Just then, the door buzzed and I bolted inside like my life depended on it, because I felt like it probably did. I ran up the stairs to the 3rd floor, heart pounding, my backpack weighing me down like a bad life choice. The guy actually followed me into the building, his footsteps echoing behind me. But adrenaline is one hell of a motivator. I reached my door, shoved my mom aside, "Sorry, Mom," and slammed it shut behind me. Thankfully, that was the end of the chase. He didn't try to force his way in or anything. I told my mom everything that had happened, and her and I called the police. For 2 weeks, I refused to go home alone. My mom picked me up every day until we saw the news. A man had been arrested for attempted kidnapping and child assault. And guess whose face popped up on the screen? That's right, my stalker. The relief that I felt was immense, but the experience taught me a few things. 1, always charge your phone. 2, trust your gut. And 3, never, ever sit in front of a creepy dude on public transport. To the man who terrorized my 12-year-old self, if you're ever released, I hope that our paths never cross again. And to everyone else, stay safe out there. Creeps are real, but so are good instincts.